All right, so I did my presentation on the Hunger Games. It's a best-selling novel trilogy by Suzanne Collins. The Hunger Games, the original book, was published in 2008 and was on the New York Times best-selling list for up to 6 years. The novels were then made into 4 movie adaptations, which came out from the years 2012 to 2015, and they generated just under $700 million. I will be using references to both the books and the films to communicate the concepts of exploitive capitalism, othering of the poor, othering of people of color, and along with semiotics and their real life parallels. So some history of Panem, which is the country it's set in. It's a dystopian future of present day North America. And like, here's a map of what it would be like broken down into. Panem is made up of the wealthy capital, which is located in the Rocky Mountains with 13 surrounding districts. The districts exist to be exploited for the resources they produce by the capital and their citizens who live extraordinarily lavish and wasteful lifestyles, while the district citizens live in varying states of poverty. District 13, who produces nuclear weapons, led a rebellion against the capital and was able to dominate them due to their advanced weapons. The capital and District 13 came to a peace agreement where the district would live underground and convinced the remaining 12 districts that the capital destroyed 13 to scare the other districts out of future rebellions. The capital then created the Hunger Games as a form of genocidal punishment to be so extreme that the districts would never rebel again. Since some history on the Hunger Games are an annual mandatory and televised event where 24 district children aged 12 through 18 fight to the death. The children are chosen during what is known as the reaping, where a boy and girl from each district are nominated to be tributes. The children are selected via a lottery where their names are added once per year from the ages of 12 through 18, summing up a total of 7 minimum times by the time they age out of the competition. The president of the Capitol, President Snow, has a popular quote from the first book and movie. He says, "Hope is the only thing stronger than fear. A little hope is effective, a lot of hope is dangerous." In other words, he gives the districts hope that they can survive the yearly Hunger Games, a 1 in 24 chance, but not enough hope that they can rebel against the capital. So the first theme is exploitative capitalism. Capitalism can be defined as an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. The drastic health disparity between the districts and the capital is the embodiment of late-stage capitalism. For example, 64% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck and over 40 million live in poverty. Despite this, the top 10% of wealthy US families who make over 1.2 million own 76% of the population's wealth. To put that into perspective, the bottom 50% of Americans who make less than 122,000 yearly make up just 1% of the national wealth. The significant contrast between the overly wealthy and the impoverished households resembles the power imbalance between the districts and the capital. So the next theme is othering of the poor. Tesserae is a form of voluntary food rationing offered by the capital to exchange your name being in the reaping bowl another time on top of the mandatory yearly adding. And this is only offered to children aged 12 through 18. The food ration consists of a yearly supply of grain and oil for one person, but throughout the book, they mention that this is barely enough to survive off of. And so many poor districts rely on their young children to claim tesserae to feed their households. And because of this, they have a larger likelihood of being selected due to their need of tesserae, and they are disproportionately nominated for the Hunger Games. And then another real life parallel is that according to Health Daily US as of 2023, poverty is the 4th leading cause of death in the nation. The study's lead author and professor of public policy, David Brady, said that poverty kills as much as dementia, accidents, stroke, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. In both the Hunger Games and real life, there was a strong correlation between race and poverty, which leads us to the next slide, othering of people of color. The poorer districts in Panem, specifically districts 8 through 12, are disproportionately made up of people of color. District 11 is a predominantly Black community and home to Rue, a 12-year-old tribute. District 11 is in charge of the production of agriculture, which is rumored to be a reference to the legacy of slavery in the United States. District 12 is home to Katniss Everdeen, the protagonist. Though she was casted by a white woman in the films, her and the people of District 12 are described as having olive tan skin, gray eyes, and black hair, attributes of many non-white races. In the United States today, Black and Hispanic people have a much higher poverty rate than other racial groups, as described by the graph by Peter G. Peterson Foundation. 20% of all Black and Hispanic people in the United Lastly is the semiotics between Katniss and the Capitol. Semiotics are the interpretive analytical system to understand how meaning is generated. Semiotics are broken down into two groups: denotative, referring to its literal explicit meaning, and connotative, where meaning is informed by the cultural and historical context of the image and its viewers' lived felt knowledge of those circumstances, all that the image means to them socially and personally. So as I mentioned before, Rue, the 12-year-old tribute, was murdered after Katniss befriended her. And after she died, Katniss created a shrine of flowers around her body. And Katniss saw this in a denotative way of simply respecting and mourning her friend who passed away, while the Capitol saw this as in a connotative way as an act of rebellion by forcing the desensitized and indoctrinated Capitol citizens watching the televised games to see Rue as a 12-year-old child who was murdered rather than just a pawn in a game. This is vastly similar to the hashtag Not a Bug Splat movement, which took place during the US's war on terror in the Middle East, where bomb operators in faraway places killed innocent civilians, including children. An artist group created a giant printout photograph of an innocent Pakistani child who was murdered by a US bomb, which is pictured on the right. The movement's goal was to force the bomb operators, who are desensitized in a very similar way to Capitol citizens, to see the human life that they are destroying through indirect means. So in conclusion, The Hunger Games is a powerful story about an abusive totalitarian government with significant parallels to reality. The novel trilogy and the adapted films were used to describe the learned concepts of exploitative capitalism, the othering, and semiotics. My own critique is that I feel like the author could have dug deeper into the theme of late stage capitalism and systemic racism, but since the reading age is only 11 through 13, I think that would have been too much for them to understand. Yeah, that's my PlayStation.
I'm going to think something that you make that comment about it being too much for the readers to understand, because the last class, a student gave their talk about the game Monopoly, and Monopoly is all about the dangers of capitalism and the way in which that original meaning has been lost and sort of become this pro-capitalism sort of expression. The game itself is made for 8-year-olds, and it's interesting that for the idea of ideology, it's not about whether they understand it or not. It's about normalizing a ideological framework by normalizing something like monopoly and greed is good kind of concept that supports the overall ideology that we'll learn later on in life. Many of the things that, while not necessarily explicitly seen in the media or the games or the movies and stuff that we see, are understood. All of us in this class are only through our intense research realizing that these things are embedded within the meaning of things without explicitly knowing it until after you actually look at it critically. But I thought that was an interesting.
Yeah, I just reread the books. The books are much more like they go into a lot deeper depth. And like I mentioned, Katniss was casted as a white woman in the movies. And I think that because of our current society, I mean, and it came out in 2012, that if the director did make it where people of color were the ones being oppressed and literally showing that, I think often things that are deemed too political don't really get as much attention. So although I feel like it would have been so much more powerful to do that, I understand in a sense, you know what I mean? I see why, but I wish it had almost. Yeah.
All right, very nice.